So welcome to Singapore Computer Society's Women in Tech International Women's Day 2024 podcast, a podcast celebrating the achievements of women in Singapore's tech industry in commemoration of International Women's Day 2024, held in the month of March. I'm your host, Amanda, one of the EXCO members of SCS's WiT chapter myself. So this podcast is a 3-part series, each featuring a senior female leader from the Singaporean technology industry, sharing their insights on what it means to be a woman in the technology space, with the aim of inspiring fellow women in tech and encouraging allies to play a part in making the technology industry in Singapore inclusive and vibrant in nature. In episode 1, today our guest is Charu Mahajan, Managing Partner for Strategic Partners and the Talent Advisory Business for IBM Consulting in the Asia Pacific. And today's topic is creating a personal brand as a woman in tech. Now, without further ado, let's hear from Charu herself, who I'd like to invite to firstly introduce herself.
Hello, Amanda, and thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm really excited that we're talking about this topic and sharing it with the larger women community outside. So you've already introduced me, but just to give our audience a little bit of context to who I am, I'm a senior executive at IBM, and I lead 2 of the growth drivers for IBM Consulting in Asia Pacific, our strategic partnerships business and our talent and transformation advisory practice. Prior to this, I led our corporate venture program as well as our digital transformation practice across the region. I have about 22 years plus of end-to-end strategic consulting experience across the globe, and I've worked with top consulting companies in advising C-suites and boards of leading companies to address their most pressing challenges. And as you know, I actively participate and contribute to the development and facilitation of technology capabilities, talent, and startups in Asia Pacific. I'm a founding member and vice president of the Women in Tech chapter of the Singapore Computer Society and also a senior EXCO member of the IoT chapter. And I'm really passionate about the role of women in leadership positions at board levels, and I'm committed to accelerating their presence in leadership roles across the STEM industries. I also chair IBM Consulting's Diversity and Inclusion Council in APAC. And at a personal level, I'm the founder and owner of a successful online startup in Singapore and Asia Pacific. So thank you, Amanda, for having me.
Great. Thank you for sharing, Charu. After hearing your introduction, I just wanted to actually get to know how you got involved with Singapore Computer Society's Women in Tech Chapter. You mentioned you were a founder, and could I understand how you got involved in this in the first place, and any highlights on your journey with Singapore Computer Society's Women in Tech Chapter?
Sure. My association with Singapore Computer Society probably dates back, I'd say, more than 15 years at the risk of aging myself. I was involved in various chapters and special interest groups at the Singapore Computer Society. As you know, the society's role is to evangelize and drive the role of technology in various sectors and industries in Singapore. Many years ago, some women who were senior executives across technology got together and put together a sub-interest group in Computer Society to drive participation of senior women and women of all walks of life in how we're looking to drive technology in Singapore. So at the time, it used to be called the Special Interest Group. And a few of us got together and said, we're not a special interest group. We are 50% of the productive workforce in Singapore. And for us to be really recognized as a really important member of driving technology in the country, we wanted our own chapter. So a few years ago, our special interest group formulated into a full-grown independent chapter. And over the last few years, I'm so proud to say that we've doubled our membership. And I think we're about 4,000, 5,000 strong members across the market. And we've got members from across. We've got senior executive women. We've got the younger ladies who come in from schools, colleges, universities. And we now proudly co-sponsor the Women in Tech program, where we identify the contributions and the landmark participation that women make into tech across Singapore every year as part of our Women in Tech program.
Right. Hearing that from you, I myself am very proud to also be part of the Singapore Computer Society's Women in Tech chapter. And I'm so excited to see what we have in store for the future as well. So I think without further ado, we can perhaps move on into the topic questions of today. And I'll start with asking how you would define personal branding in the context of the tech industry. And can you share a personal experience that led you to realize the importance of creating a personal brand?
Thanks, Amanda. And I think that's a great question. I'm going to break it down in parts because each of the sub questions you've asked are quite significant. I think personal branding, irrespective of what industry it is in, it's really around persuading people to recognize your value, but doing it intentionally. Whether you call it personal branding or something else, you do this when you apply for a job, when you ask for a promotion, when you compete with others for leadership positions, when you even write your dating profile. What you're trying to do is really create a branding around yourself, right? So no matter what label you put on top of what you're doing, everyone today is a brand. You're a brand. I'm a brand. All of us are brands. But the difference could be how well does your branding proposition gel with the people whom you're trying to attract, right? And often we confuse our reputation with our personal brand, but the two are not the same. So let me explain that. Everyone has a reputation. That's the first impression you make. It's the relationship that you have with your friends, colleagues, peers, managers, and other people, right? And all of these things impact the way people see you. It's really about making that first impression, right? So if you ask someone to describe you, they may call you hardworking. They may call you somebody who likes to talk. They may even say that, oh, she's a person who lands up late, or she's really disciplined, right? Those are the sort of things that people may describe you. That's your reputation. Your personal brand, on the other hand, is a lot more strategic. It's a lot more intentional. It's not how people perceive you, but it's about how you want people to perceive you, right? So while your reputation is about credibility, I mean, it's really facts. Your personal brand is around how you appear visible and what values, what associations, what sorts of feelings you invoke in people when they see you, right? So personal branding is intentional. It's how you express your own value and your proposition. And it's how you cultivate an image, a persona, a reputation, a search, just everything around you that you want people to be aware of, right? So, Jeff Bezos said this once, your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. That's really personal branding. And irrespective of what industry you're in, your personal brand will be a combination of your skills. It'll be a combination of the values. It'll be the combination of what you really want to do, your authentic self, right? And it's really an empowering way for taking control back about how people perceive you and how you want them to perceive you, right? So a personal brand, a well-managed brand can really be very empowering for people. Now, the second question you asked is, in the context of the tech industry, why is personal branding important for women? And I think that's a really important question. And you know this, and we talk this so often, Amanda, when we meet in our Singapore Computer Society meetings. In most technology companies, especially in leadership positions, women are underrepresented, right? And this is more so in tech, which tends to be a male-dominated industry. If you go across the region, less than 30% of women, are seen in senior management roles, and even lesser number than that, close to 14% form part of the C-suite, right? And in technology, it's even lesser, where only 41% in Singapore of the tech workforce is represented by women, and only 14% of that serve on the boards of tech companies in Singapore, right? So you can see that the problem already is that of representation. But it isn't because women are not available, or women are not trying for leadership roles, or women are not coming out and wanting to be part of the industry. A large part of why we don't see women in these roles, apart from the fact that this is a diversity problem, there are also some barriers, some of them known, some of them uncognitive, like stereotypes, biases, discrimination, lack of flexibility in how we come across to these women in tech. I mean, let's give some examples, right? This constant feeling of walking on the razor's edge, right? This whole problem of being liked and being assertive, right? How many times in meetings, women are not able to express themselves authentically because for the fear of coming across as too assertive or people putting labels on you. Some women are scared that only women in the room and they are being talked over because there are not more like them to support them. It's really around different standards. I mean, there are studies after studies, and McKinsey released a study a few years ago which said that women are held to different standards when it comes to promotion, about feeling pressured at work, about the way they handle microaggressions versus how men do. Then, of course, there is a barrier we often talk about. I mean, people call it the work-life balance. People call it the parent trap, where there is a double standard for men and women when it comes to parenting. And very often that intense bias affects women even before they've had children, right? Because a lot of times it is assumed that once a woman has a child, she may not be able to work as long hours, may not be able to contribute the way she used to before she's had a child, right? So there is that barrier and bias. And then, of course, one of the things that we are seeing post-pandemic, and IBM released a study on this, is that during and post the pandemic, we've had literally the hollowing out of our middle management when it comes to women. Many women across the world have left the workforce altogether. And many of them who have stayed are finding the hybrid method really difficult, because not only has that made professional life enter their personal life, but the ability to manage both has become even harder, right? So while women are continuing to do some amazing thing and they're redefining the digital and the technology workforce with their groundbreaking contributions, the fact is that in technology per se, there is a challenge when it comes to having more women in the workforce, but even more so in the upper and more senior positions. And therefore that presents a problem, which is if you're already so little and so underrepresented in the workforce, how do you distinguish yourself competitively? Not only against other women, but also against men, right? And therefore, this is going to be very critical in the way you look at bridging the gender gap going forward as to how women stand up, differentiate themselves, and what is the story and the narrative that they're creating around themselves, the brand they're creating around themselves, around their skill sets, their competence, how are they being perceived, how are they dealing with the microaggressions and biases by creating a narrative where they're self-aware of the value they bring and making sure that people across them are able to see that value, right? So that personal branding becomes really important, because when you're underrepresented, you have to stand up and create a narrative for yourself, take control back. Otherwise, other people will let their stereotypes, biases, and just traditional expectations get in the way of how they perceive you and the value you bring. So Amanda, that's the reason why I think this is so critical.
I think I absolutely agree, and I really resonate with everything that you said. And sorry, were you going to continue sharing?
You know, you asked me about a personal story, and you know, I really have something I'd like to share with you. And this is a personal anecdote from maybe I'd say 8 years ago or 9 years ago. And this really comes to mind when you talk about personal branding. And once when you reached out and I thought about the topic, this particular moment in my life kept coming back to me. So, you know, 8-9 years ago, earlier in my consulting career, I specialized as an expert in consumer and retail industries. I mean, that's a role I played. I played a leadership role at another consulting company. And while I was doing that role and advising Fortune 500 companies on how they should shape their strategies in the consumer and retail space, I also had a very personal ambition, an intense personal interest in art and decor and luxury goods. So much so that I went on to establish a digital platform in Asia Pacific where I could bring together a curated collection of home decor, fine art from around the world. And to do this, I leveraged upon my expertise that I had built in my early career in consulting while working with large consumer and retail companies, right? So when I launched my platform, I actively talked about the experience that I had built in consulting while dealing with these large companies that gave me a lot of insight into the challenges platforms would face in the market. And I proactively talked about how the platform that I was launching was differentiated because it did not represent the friction points that I had learned were associated with e-commerce through my experience. Now, at the same time, while building this platform bottom up, I also got a very deep hands-on experience, a real life experience, if you may, of creating a B2C, a direct-to-consumer e-commerce platform. I could actually feel, as the owner and founder of this platform, real friction points in customer service, in logistics, in supply chain, in the last mile delivery, in returns, which helped me become a better consultant as well, because I was no longer advising my clients without having that real life experience. And when I walked into the room, I could tell clients that I too owned an e-commerce company and therefore could talk to them very vocally and from a position of credibility and strength about what I thought were the challenges in their industry, right? So this was a great example of how I had pulled together my personal interests, but also my professional interests together into a branding story. And that made for a very compelling proposition. Now, how do I know it was working? I knew it was working when other business owners, CEOs of large retail consumer companies would seek me out or would give my new consulting firm where I worked business, given my personal expertise, right? So personal branding is important, but you also need to regularly track if it's working and seek feedback to see if the people that you're trying to reach out to, the constituents that you want to reach out to, are responding favorably to the message that you're putting out. And if there is a disconnect, you have to go back and look at what's not working. So I just wanted to share that story with you, Amanda.
It's such an inspiring story, and I really think it was so strategic of you, for instance, to bring your previous experience as a consultant and use that to your advantage when you were establishing your consulting firm. And I think on top of that, it's quite brilliant also to take the experience that you garner from setting up your consulting firm and working in your consulting firm and bring that back to clients and telling them and reassuring them that you have the necessary expertise and credibility in that area because of your own personal experiences as well. You created this kind of positive feedback loop for yourself. And I think that's very amazing. I think that's a great takeaway that a lot of people can take into account. I think with that, we have reached about the end of the podcast. And with that, I guess, listeners, that was Charu from IBM. And today we talked about creating a personal brand as a woman in technology. And we've come away with some fantastic learnings, really insightful stuff that we're hearing today. With that, I think, I hope that you have been inspired by our guests, and we hope to see you for the next episode. Thank you so much for listening. And this was Amanda and Charu.